I hope you're all as excited as I am as we are about to dive deep into the world of sustainability and talk more about the specific materials packaging firms are currently working on in our panel discussion, Should We All Go Naked? Now, before we start, I will just say at this point, if you are seeing us in a little low resolution, you can see me and all of our panelists better by clicking the HD button in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and then you'll be able to see us crystal clear. Now, we all know that beauty has a problem with waste. I don't just want to say that's on the packaging front. I think we can all agree it's a much deeper issue than that. There are problems with excessive packaging and flamboyance for beauty brands, even though that's what we love about the industry. But at the end of the day, this is having devastating consequences on our natural environment. And it has been heavily documented that the beauty industry is a massive contributor to landfill waste. I think a very common statistic thrown around is that beauty on a global scale annually contributes 120 billion units of packaging, to landfill dumps or into our natural world. And it has also been said that only 9% of all plastic waste that has ever been produced has been recycled, and around 12% has been incinerated. Happily, though, the industry has wised up to the error of its ways. And as we heard from some of our topics earlier today, there is opportunity for a lot of innovation here as sustainable packaging basically becomes a sector in its own right. The evidence is also there that this is what consumers want. They want to shop sustainably. Statistics show that 88% of consumers look for sustainability credentials when shopping for beauty and personal care products. And over the last few years, certainly since I've been working in beauty, there's been a boom in this innovation and a shift in that consumer demand for brands to really make an effort in terms of their sustainability credentials. And I think that we can all agree customers are no longer happy to just accept if a brand chooses not to make an effort. So through this innovation, we've seen the rise of biodegradable packaging alternatives. Refills have become a staple to many brands as well, and this is seen across all beauty categories. But where we got the inspiration for this panel was from mainstream ethical beauty brand Lush, which first rolled out its naked concept in 2007. And since then, it has adopted stores with this concept on a global scale over the last few years. And this campaign was to get rid of all its packaging across makeup lines, body products, and its bath bombs. But the question I want to pose to our panelists today, is this really the right way forward for our industry? And to help us decide this and hear more about those packaging materials that members of the beauty industry are increasingly asking for, we have a fantastic lineup of panelists today. We have Jo Chidley, who's the founder of Beauty Kitchen, who just now gave her introduction to refillables. Rodney Steele, who is Chief Executive of BCMPA, the Association of Contract Manufacturing, Packing, Fulfillment and Logistics, who will give more on his insight into outsourcing of materials and how the group is providing support for brands, for brand owners and retailers. Jane Sterland, a well-known figure in the sustainability arena and Managing Director of Weleda, is also with us. And finally, Ben Grace, the founder of Subtract, whose packless skincare brand runs with the ethos, less is more. So hello to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on our panel today.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Yeah, good afternoon,
everybody.
So I think the best way for us to start off here would be making the case for naked beauty brands, given that that is our topic title. And I think there's definitely been an influx of them in recent years and growing in popularity with customers for their sustainable credentials. So I think I'll direct this firstly to you, Ben. Is going naked the answer to beauty's problem with waste?
So I think I'm slightly biased, running running a naked skincare brand, but the answer to that, from my perspective, is definitely yes. I think particularly for new brands coming into the market, though, I think Subtract, we've been, I don't know whether fortunate is the right word, but we've had visibility and knowledge of the problem and the challenge that the industry is facing at the point at which we're developing the brand and the idea and the format of the products. For me, what isn't excusable, in my opinion, is new brands coming to market with recyclable packaging, saying they're sustainable, when, in my opinion, recycling just generally is broken. As you mentioned a number of different statistics there, but we know that a huge number of us don't recycle our bathroom waste. We know that a huge amount of the recyclable waste that we produce isn't recycled. And so for me, that's a problem. And I guess for more established brands, the problem is reversing out of that issue. And that's the big challenge for, the Unilevers and the P&Gs and everything else of this world, is how do they do that? Obviously, they've got to run a business at the same time. And I think, certainly Beauty Kitchen and Weleda, they're both really good examples of how, brands are now taking full responsibility for the life of the packaging beyond just when it leaves the warehouse, and they're actually doing something about that, whereas a number of different brands would wash their hands of it, frankly, when they, no pun intended, when they the products leave the warehouse, and then it's down to the consumer what they do with it, how they dispose of it, and then it's down to the local authority as to what recycling facilities they have and what they can provide. So for me, as I said, as a new brand starting from scratch, we just knew that zero waste was where we wanted to go in order to tackle that challenge head on.
Yeah, I think, would anybody sort of like to weigh in on that? Jane, do you have sort of anything to add?
I was delighted, Ben, when you said established brands might, cut them a bit of slack, because it's really true. So we shouldn't have any waste. I mean, we shouldn't. If you just think about it logically, we shouldn't be putting cream in a pot that's going to last 1,000 years and the cream's going to last a month. It does not make sense. And it's not just about going into landfill. A lot of this plastic gets washed up on the beach. I'm calling in up from the Outer Hebrides today, so hopefully my connection is going to be fine. And I walked on the beach yesterday, and I was picking up toothpaste tops and lids and so on. It's absolutely, it's ridiculous that we're using plastics and packaging that will last a lot longer than the product itself. However, I speak on behalf of Weleda and probably many other well-established brands. We've been going for 100 years, and just to straight re-engineer or engineer ourselves out is really, really difficult. So we have on the market about 150 products. We try to increase the recycled content. We're constantly looking at, is there a better way of packaging while still maintaining the business and the hundreds of thousands of products that are going to go out. So that's not an excuse at all. That's just saying there is a practical reality. And sadly, the practical reality is twofold. The first thing is that we don't have a circular system. In Germany, it's a lot better. In Switzerland, it's pretty good. But globally, it's a really unlevel playing field. And particularly in the UK, we can't even be joined up within our district councils. Wales is brilliant at recycling. England is pretty rubbish. So straight away, that's a massive disadvantage, because if you pick a particular plastic, that might be recycled, it might not be recycled. And then the second thing is that it's not just about plastics, it's about all of the packaging that we use. So for example, cardboard, 70% of all waste that comes out of the beauty industry is card based. It's things like, I've already mentioned little lids that I found on the beach, but it's things like pumps and dispensers that are impossible to recycle. It's things like aluminium. At Weleda, we still use a lot of aluminium tubes, but aluminium mining isn't great. So we have a real problem.
Oh, Jane, I think you've just dropped out. Sorry, yeah. No,
Am I back now?
Back.
See, I did tell you it might be a bit dodgy. So yes, it's about upping our recycled content. It's about looking at moving to a circular system. It's about looking at new innovation in terms of the substrates that we can use. And then finally, what I was going to say is that for a natural brand, for an organic brand, our packaging is our preservative system, which is really difficult because you can, if you put a lot of preservatives into your product, then reduce the amount of packaging. But at the end of the day, what we try to do is make sure that our packaging keeps oxygen out and keeps bacteria out of the product so the products last longer. So it's all of these things, and to say it's another one of those 50 shades of green. It's very, very complicated, and we all need to do more, but we need a completely joined up system. There isn't one thing that we could do that is going to solve this.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. We've talked a little bit throughout the day on having so many different options for people out there, because consumers are wanting different forms of packaging. You know, as Ben with Subtract, some don't think that they're no packaging and that there shouldn't be as much waste. But then on the other hand, Joe, you obviously make the case for refillables as well. So I mean, you've recently teamed up with Unilever on a massive deal to infiltrate refillables for some of its brands. So what is the case for using refillables as an alternative method to single use? And what does this deal with Unilever show to other brands and manufacturers about refillables' popularity?
Yeah, so when we started out as Beauty Kitchen as a small indie brand, which we still are, it was cradle to cradle principles, it was reusable packaging. But the idea was that if we managed to unlock reusable packaging and refill in store, we wouldn't want to keep that to ourselves because we're tiny. And even over 30 years, we'll still be probably quite tiny in comparison to a Unilever. So when it comes to sustainability and making those true big impacts, it has to be the big companies that make those small changes, because that's where the big impact comes from. So we had to design, when we were doing our reusable packaging, we designed a program to sit behind that and almost debunk all of those barriers to entry. And really then say to the industry, when it comes to reusable packaging and refill in store with reusable packaging, because it's twofold, it's either reusable packaging pre-fills sitting on a shelf, or it's refill in store with your reusable bottle or packaging. And that programme was then opened up to anyone in the industry, and Unilever were the first big customer of that. And that return, refill, repeat programme is hopefully going to be dynamic enough to be able to push the industry to say, we've debunked all of the barriers to entry, guys, and we want to open source this to try and engage and innovate and move the dial forward. Because I don't know how many pieces of packaging Unilever use in a year. I don't even want to guess, but it must be billions. So if they pick up reusable packaging and they make it on a scalable global level, then my job is done.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would like to think of the output as well, but there is such a case for sharing that knowledge, as you've said before. I know when Unilever launched Love Beauty, Love Planet, they said we're not patenting all of these, packaging technologies because we want more people to adopt that. But over to you, Rodney. Working with the BC MPA, you've been ahead of that business for the last 20 years now. And over that time, have you seen a shift in what your members ask when it comes to working with specific packaging materials?
Yes, it's not so much a case of what our members ask us, it's what they're asked by their potential customers. And for those listening in today, just to explain, I run a trade association called the BCMPA. So our members do contract manufacturing, contract packing, and they also go downstream to do fulfillment and logistics. So in other words, if you like, offering a one-stop shop is the new phrase. So they see it right through, which is excellent, and also quite good for the environment because it's sitting in one place most of the time. A contract manufacturer has to be very flexible because they're working for lots of different people. Now, if you get a normal brand and they're producing the stuff and packing it internally, they get used to doing things a certain way. They've got machines set up for doing certain pack formats, and they very often perhaps can't diverge from that very much because that is their modus operandi. For a contract manufacturer, it's completely different because they're working for one brand owner one day, another one the next, another one the next, another one the next. So first of all, the likelihood is they've got quite a range of machinery, but more importantly, they've got a whole mindset of flexibility and agility. And that has really come to the fore in the last year or so with COVID, because a huge amount of brands have had to outsource. They can't manage it internally. They've had to cut back on staff and do social distancing and so forth. So most of our members over the last year have had record years, and that's continuing now. So they are extremely busy. They put in new filling lines and so on and so forth. So coming back to your original question, Becky, so our members are asked all kinds of things, and we at the BCMPA get about 100 sales leads coming in via our online form every month. We also have a search facility on a website, so people can put in personal care and beauty, they can put in contract manufacturing, they can put in filling liquids or creams and into tubes or whatever, and you come up with a short list of members with that capability. So those are the two ways that potential customers can find out how our members can help. And when people phone us up or email us, the usual question is, oh yes, we've got a new hand cream and we want to do this and we want to do that and we want it in a tube. And of course, it's got to be organic, and of course, it's got to be sustainable. So, well, that's jolly good. And we're all trying to do the right thing, aren't we? But what is the right thing? And there isn't an easy answer to that, as has just been explained by the rest of the panel. And for example, Jane was saying, you know, she's out in the wilds, but is still seeing caps on beaches. Well, they don't walk up there by themselves. They actually get plonked on the beach by human beings. And I noticed Jane says in her bio, an energetic activist for social and environmental responsibility. And the social bit is extremely important because social is us, we public. We're the monsters here. And I appreciate that any packaging material has its issues, but I do somewhat get upset on occasions when plastic is demonized into this horrible thing that we've got to get rid of, because actually it has a huge amount of benefits. So there are other types of packaging in certain instances, and my colleagues here on the panel will know much more from their own companies, you know, what the best mix is. But that's the dilemma. Everybody wants to ask our members what is the right thing, and our members are pretty experienced at advising people, but there is no single answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. You talk about the social aspects, and also that there is a case for plastic in some areas. So I mean, I think that to the other panelists, do you? I'll ask this to Ben. Do you believe that there is a place for plastic within beauty?
Personally, no, I don't. I don't really believe that, which is why I went down the route I went down with Subtract. I just think that, you know, until there's a sort of workable alternative that doesn't kind of sit around for gazillion years on the planet, then I just don't think it is the way forward. I think we have to turn the tap off altogether. And again, that's really, I know it's not straightforward at all, and it's not something that we can do overnight. But for me, the new businesses coming into the industry, you know, it absolutely has to be the way forward, in my opinion. So that's my opinion. I just think that there will be no plastic within my organisation and you know, within my products and the packaging.
Would anyone else sort of like to weigh in at this point? Maybe Joe, because you talked just about using aluminium instead, and we talked about that glass and those products, those sort of materials have been around a lot longer than plastic. But again, plastic alongside that, it's about adding value to that product. So is there a place for it in that regard?
So I think coming back to Ben's point, I wanted to add to that anyway. I think when it comes to any consumer-based industry, I think one of the problems that we have is consumerism overall. So I think that's one of the social aspects that needs to be challenged, but that's not for today. But then complementing what Ben said, I think it is around choice and it is around convenience. You know, if you're a new indie brand and you decide to put everything in a standard, you know, plastic way of doing things, I'm just not sure how successful you will necessarily be as a new brand. Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, the consumers that you're targeting don't really want to know about plastic. So, you know, I think it depends on what your strategy is as a business, which consumers that you are targeting and what your offering is. So if I look at what Ben is offering, he's targeting, you know, a certain percentage of consumers. They will tend to be a younger demographic, I suspect. You know, and there's somebody that sustainability and zero waste is the first point of call, and maybe efficacy is maybe the second port of call. And there has to be that choice that's available to those consumers. Just like you may have somebody that is looking for something that is convenient and cheap packaging, which is what plastic really is, and that meets that consumer's needs. I think it's just around who you're targeting as a consumer. The underlying negativity of that, though, is that we are all in this together. And at the end of the day, we know that plastic is bad. We have too much of it. We should not be making any more. Now, we know we've got to do retrofitting from an infrastructure perspective. We've got to change consumer behaviours. There's a whole raft of things. But there's no point if you're a new brand or an established brand trying to add to that problem. So, you know, I'm kind of with Ben on this.
Can I just say that I don't think I don't think efficacy does come second. I think it absolutely comes first. I think that, you know, at the same time, the generation's waking up. We've changed the way we, you know, the milk we drink, the way we carry our coffee, our water, our shopping, you know, even the trainers we wear, that's all changed for the better. And our industry hasn't really sat up in a meaningful way and taken notice. But I think that the consumer has. And it's not that they don't want to make the choice, it's just that the choice isn't available. And for me, my challenge as a brand and what I want to achieve is that, you know, I believe I can deliver, you know, the very best skincare on the market, but without any plastic packaging. And that's my goal. And that is absolutely what my consumers expect, I think.
Yeah, sorry, Ben, just to add to that, I wasn't meaning that that's what it would be. Yeah. I was just giving that as an example that maybe sustainability and that zero waste is their first, you know, thought that comes into it. So I appreciate efficacy is always high on why would you make a product otherwise?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. Oh, sorry, Rodney. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to move on to e-commerce and the effects of that, because in the beauty industry and a lot of other industries as well, packaging can fall into two categories. One is a really top flight look standing on the shelf in the beauty department of John Lewis or whatever, which has to stand out from its competitors next door. And it has to look good, otherwise people would not pluck it off the shelf. But with e-commerce, of course, the decision has already been made somehow or another, and we won't go into that. And then all of a sudden, the packaging completely changes. You need the outside of, let's say, a cardboard box, which needs to look fairly plain so it doesn't get misappropriated en route to but when it gets the customer, there's got to be a wow factor when you open it. You know, a lady doesn't want to get an expensive bottle of perfume for her birthday and have it in a paper bag. It's got to have some sort of a wow factor. Now that could be vanity, one could say, but that's what people actually desire. So you know, you need to have a box which opens and is colourful and it's maybe got a bow around it and a bit of velvet and all the rest of it. And to make people come back again, it maybe needs a voucher in there or discount or something. It's a completely different type of packaging. So in fact, packaging has increased a lot, even though people love to buy online these days, which they've had to because obviously the shops have been closed. And the impact of that has got a massive impact on the environment. You know, all that extra packaging, not to mention the white van man that double park up and down our high streets everywhere. And then, of course, a lot of people, not so much maybe in the personal care, but certainly the clothing side, there's the returns handling aspect of it, where somebody might order sort of 6 items in different colours and different sizes, keep 2 and send the other 4 back. So that's once again another journey, and then people have got to be the other end to sort it, and the impact on the environment is absolutely massive. So, you know, whilst the letterbox has opened the door to a lot of business opportunities, it's also presented a massive amount of environmental problems.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a question come in from the audience, which I think I'm going to field to you, Jane. Julia has asked, she says, I love Lush's model, but they benefit hugely from having their own retail environment, which they can control. How can I, as in she, work with retail partners and logistics and fulfillment teams to propose packaging free or at least packaging reduced in a realistic way that won't result in the product arriving to shops for direct to consumers damaged or that are unsellable?
That is a fantastic question. So I'll begin by saying the process. So we don't have our own shops. And as Joe and Ben will know, the process isn't just about what we call the primary packaging or the secondary packaging, what the product is in, what you'll see on the shelf, but there's also tertiary packaging. So it's how you put the product into your transit boxes to make sure that it doesn't get damaged en route. So we'll either use a lot of glass, we always have done, and we get a lot of breakages because of the way the product is handled, not necessarily by us or even by a retailer, but by the transit in between. And you know, you put all of this love and effort into making that product, and then to have it smashed on the way to point of purchase is just even more unforgivable. So there's tertiary packaging we need to talk about. We also need to talk about what you see on shelves. So I think there is a really big opportunity for us to work with retailers. Rodney, you mentioned e-tailers. Actually, e-tailers don't have a lot of this problem. They have some of this problem. But when you go into store, and maybe you go into, you know, a lovely bright store on the high street that's known for health and beauty, and you can, there's a choice of 2 or 3. You can pick which your favourite one is. You'll go in, and every month you'll see that all of the end caps and the gondola ends, so these displays at the end of each aisle changes, and that changes because it's all about promotions and it's enticing us to buy more things. And the beauty industry at the moment is fueled by new product development, the new bright shiny thing. So there's an enormous amount of, if you like, point of sale waste that goes into that. So we have primary and secondary packaging, so the tube or the bottle or the box that our product goes in, the tertiary packaging that goes into the retailer, and then of course what the retailer does with it within the store in terms of making it look really beautiful. And that builds a mountain of waste. So go behind the brand, you know, your favorite health and beauty store that you've gone into. What is their sustainability policy? And I was talking to the CEO of a high street chain that will remain nameless just a couple of weeks ago, and I challenged them on it and said, look, we want to get rid of a lot of this tertiary packaging because you want us to, what's known as shrink wrap, is put plastic around 6 products so that we can go into your distribution centre and then you can send 6 products out into each individual store. We don't want to do that anymore. it's a waste. That adds no value to anybody, and it is a massive disadvantage to us financially, but to the planet. What are we doing here? And they said, well, quite frankly, we've got so much work to do on sustainability. It's very, very low down our list of priorities. So, Becky, earlier on, you said that a great statistic. So 88% of consumers want beauty brands to do more. I would like to see 100% of consumers asking retailers to do more. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I do think that there is a lot of work to be done through both brand pressure, but also a lot of consumer pressure about this thing called added value, which adds no added value at all.
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, we look to, as all of us are consumers ourselves, we look to brands to make those changes. But if retailers aren't adopting that as well, then there's not going to be that change. And Ben, I mean, you obviously have just started your brand, and I mean, would that change your mind on, or channel which retailers you would choose to go into if there is this added waste that they're putting on shelf?
Potentially, I think there's a few ways you can look at that though in terms of the challenge. I guess the way I would probably look at it is I'd be taking a Trojan horse approach and changing it by going in kind of that way. But for me, I think Rodney made a really interesting point earlier about how people were expecting this newness and this flamboyancy, and that's in many ways that is a big part of our industry and what consumers expect and what they enjoy about their products. And I think that's the other big challenge really, is how do you in reality, sort of thinking about it logically, obviously a shiny pot, a plastic pot, doesn't add any value to your product. It doesn't make it a better moisturizer or a better skincare product. And yet in your mind, you feel like you're getting greater value just because it looks nice. And so part of the challenge is, well, how do you make something look nice, whether it's in your bathroom or on the bathroom shelf, Jane? It's not the bathroom shelf, the retailer shelf. How do you kind of innovate with packaging that is sustainable, but also looks great and appeals to the consumer on the shelf, so that they choose your product. And then when they get it home, it looks great on the bathroom shelf, which is why we developed these accessories, recognizing that solid products, arguably, if they're just left by the side of the sink and get wet, and, there's various sort of performance issues with that. And so it was really important to develop accessories that looked beautiful, but also did a job in terms of performance. And used materials that were sustainable. So we developed a bamboo pot to house our moisturizer, to keep it dry and keep it out of direct sunlight. And then for our cleanser, we've got a dish that's made out of fossilized algae that is porous and antibacterial, but also looks beautiful. So there's like this aesthetic element to what we do as an industry and what we offer that is the other part of the challenge. It's not just about, as Rodney said, if you just got something in a a paper bag, you wouldn't be particularly impressed, no matter what it was. So therefore, what is the alternative to that, so that we can sort of deliver this aesthetic sort of enjoyment to the customer, if you like?
Yeah, it's a great point, and that's what we've talked about a lot today as well, on the innovation of looking at those new things. And I said, basically, sustainable packaging is a complete and utter category in its own right.
It really is.
But, yeah, I mean, but lots of people are now moving towards biodegradables and compostables. And on that sort of point, we've had a great question come in from Joe, who says, are biodegradable and compostable packaging offering a promising solution for the industry? Or are there challenges here too over how easily it can be composted at home for a consumer? Rodney, I see you shaking your head at that question.
There's a lot of cynicism over that, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but no, I mean, it sounds wonderful, but I'm not quite sure that it's achievable at the moment. And one of the other problems is if it does get in with other plastics that are being recycled and actually being reused, it can break the whole thing down. So that's a really, really tricky question. That in itself is not an answer, in my opinion, but I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the panel say.
I think anything that drives new thoughts and new innovation, it then nudges the dial on. Because at the end of the day, if we just sit with what we've currently got, nothing's ever going to change. You know, so and there is some interesting parts, particularly when it comes to compostables, because it depends on the product that you have. So if we look to other industries, which is, if you look at the food industry and the coffee industry, you can have dried coffee in a compostable, home compostable, as well as industrial compostable bag. So if you've got a dry product for beauty, then you could utilize that. So I think it's about nudging the dial and being open to innovation. What I don't think has happened is that there hasn't been a lot of innovation within the traditional plastic industry. So I think if we're driving at innovation in other areas, then that can only be a good thing. And then we learn from the good things that happen with that and some of the mistakes that happen with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Would anyone else sort of like to weigh in on that front?
Well,
Yes,
Becky, yeah, sorry, carry on.
I would just add to what Joe said. It's a really promising start, and for dry products, yes, absolutely. But where you bring in water, then you need something that isn't going to biodegrade with your product on the shelf, because again, go back to retailers and just the commercialities of our beauty products. We usually have a 36-month shelf life, so that means the product has to remain pristine up until that sell-by date. So you need something that isn't going to biodegrade on the shelf for 36 months. That's a bit of a challenge. I'm sure we will get there, and quite frankly, I don't think we really understood this. Well, we did understand it was a problem. We chose not to do anything about it until we had David Attenborough's Blue Planet. And that really hit home to everybody. And Rodney, you said, we're all citizens here. Whatever we are, we are all part of society. We all need to take responsibility. I think in 5 years' time, the kind of substrates that will be available to us will be really, really exciting. And there's lots of fantastic things that are happening with mushrooms, with fungi, you mentioned algae, bacteria, all sorts of amazing things. It's just a bit of a shame that it's taken, it took a naturalist to say, hey guys, look at what you're doing, to really wake us up. And I think as an industry, we should have been doing this 20 years ago. But the problem is that plastic, I come back to plastic, is so cheap. It's such an easy solution. And we didn't go beyond that. And as we switch out of fossil fuels, there's a heck of a lot. I think of all of the fossil fuels that have come out of the ground, there's still a third that's still on the balance sheets of the big fossil fuel companies. They probably will want to realise that asset. So where is it going to go if it's not going to be going into motor vehicles and it will become cheaper. So we do have a really big problem. So Becky, answer to your question, I'm really optimistic. I think what's come about just in this last 18 months is really exciting. We're not there yet for the beauty industry, but we will absolutely get there. And I'm really delighted about that.
Sorry to interrupt. Oh, go on, Rodney. You were going to say something.
No, thank you. Yes, mentioning David Attenborough, I mean, so much of what he's done is fantastic. But one of the first effects was that, the one-trip plastic shopping bags were demonised, and everybody was encouraged to get bags for life, which actually, to anybody who knows about it, made absolutely no environmental sense whatsoever, because the environmental impact of a bag for life is typically 70 times that of a one-trip bag. And that was assuming you only use the one-trip bag once. And very often people put dirty trainers in or use them as waste bags. So you then, against 140, twice times 70, environmental impact. Or, of course, nobody uses it 70 times, even if they do happen to buy one. And if they put it in the washing machine, that's another environmental impact. So everybody's gone shooting off and said, oh, well, you've got to have bags for life. But you may have noticed in the press in the last couple of weeks that a couple of the supermarkets are sort of saying, oh, well, we're abandoning bags for life because they're so environmentally friendly. We're going back to single trip bags, but they will be compostable. it's all a load of old nonsense, really, because what they're actually trying to do is to sort of say, here we are, we're a supermarket, we're very environmentally friendly, do come and shop at our store. But what they're actually doing is rather disingenuous.
It's an interesting point you made there, Rodney. Yeah, and just to go back over to you, Ben, you were going to dive in with some points there as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so obviously that, you know, as Jane was mentioning, you know, I'm sure there will be dramatic steps forward in terms of the substrates that we're able to use for our packaging, etc. But what I've also noticed is that there's, in line with the sort of packaging innovation, there's also ingredient innovation. That means that for developing solid products like mine, you can, you know, there are really fantastic ingredients that don't contain water, that work really well in a solid format and allow sort of brands to develop products that do deliver, you know, really fantastic expert skincare results, but just without that packaging element to it. So I think hand in hand, the ingredient innovations with the packaging innovations, hopefully we can get somewhere that works really well. You know, Jane mentioned about how there are challenges when you've got an organic product in terms of being able to keep it on the shelf for a period of time and avoid, you know, bacteria getting into it, etc., etc. But hopefully those two elements working together will be able to overcome that, I would hope.
Yeah, it's all about marrying together. Everybody has to look to the same goal at the end if it all sort of wants to work harmoniously. But we've had a question come in, Ben, that I think I would like to direct to you, and it says, what if a new product isn't compatible with a naked packaging design? Is it worth considering reformulation? I assume that's not something that you've had issues with, as you've always wanted to do solids. But what would you sort of say to someone that wants to maybe go into the naked packaging and they're having to reformulate, and it might be a bit tricky?
Well, I mean, you know, new product development is always tricky, I think, you know, especially if you're doing something really that's different or new, it will be tricky, it will take time. You know, I first had the idea of Subtract in March 2019, and I didn't get to market until August 2020. So, you know, certain products have been more straightforward to formulate. Others, the moisturizing facial balm was trickier because making sure the payoff was right, you know, that it didn't just kind of sit on your face, that it absorbed really well, that it did the job, you know, more importantly. I would say stick with it and just keep on iterating and keep on trying, because I just come back to this idea that if you're a new brand, it's almost like the world, you know, whether we like it or not, unless you're doing something really, really revolutionary in skincare, the world has enough moisturizers, unless you're going to do something different. So if you're just going to come to the market with a moisturizer that's got a new fragrance and in a plastic tube, I wouldn't bother, frankly. I just think it's not the way forward. Sorry.
Yeah, no, because we've talked about that before, you and I, about your moisturizing, and you said that it was quite difficult to make that, but you wanted to put in the time and the effort to make sure that you had that payoff. That's what it's about. And we've had another great question come in, and this person says, my company, a food and beauty manufacturer, sells a naked product, which is a laundry soap, in a cardboard case in grocery stores around the Caribbean, and has been around for 50 years. But during COVID, distributors indicated that customers would like packaging around the product due to hygiene concerns. And so they're considering adding this packaging, but would prefer not to. How do we change consumer preferences around naked products and hygiene? Would anyone like to, I won't direct that at anybody, but if anybody would like to sort of jump in on that front, please feel free to do so.
I mean, there was always going to be the challenge with hygiene. Doesn't matter whether your product is naked or otherwise, if I'm honest. You know, when we've got the pandemic backdrop, we've all had to look at the range of different products that we have and think about how do we give that reassurance back out to the customer. I think this particular area, in terms of it being a laundry soap, I'm a bit kind of questionable about why the consumer would really be wondering about hygiene when really what you'd be doing is cleaning clothes with it, rather than cleaning, you know, your hands and your face. So maybe it's more of a marketing angle that has to be, you know, taken for that particular product. But I think all of us have had to think about how the pandemic challenges any products that we have.
Yeah, I would love to ask a little bit more on that, seeing as we're on the topic of the pandemic, because obviously the Beauty Kitchen is all about refills, you know, so when stores were closed, I mean, this is a complete, you know, anomaly and a real red herring for the pandemic for this to have happened. So, but how did Beauty Kitchen sort of overcome those customers not being able to go into stores to go and do their refilling, and have there been any sort of strategies that you've adopted going forward?
Well, what was interesting about the refill stations is that the stores that we chose to launch in, it was around democratising sustainability. So we didn't choose, you know, exclusive department stores to do that launch. We launched in Boots in Covent Garden and then Asda in Middleton in Leeds. So, you know, thankfully, both of those stores have stayed open throughout. So there hasn't actually been the challenge, because the refill stations that we launched were a test bed for the larger launch that's happening later this year in the lead up to COP. With the pre-fills, which is our products, Beauty Kitchen products in reusable packaging, again, the stores that we sell through, not just direct to consumer, are high street brands that have been open throughout. So although there has been, I'm not saying a challenge on sales, we haven't grown this year because our growth was actually through different channels. But what we haven't done is we haven't gone backwards either. So it's given us an opportunity to really focus in on the business. But thankfully, the refill revolution is still happening.
That's good to hear. I mean, Jane, as well, with Relate, have you had to do sort of any adopting methods, you know, in terms of hygiene or anything on your packaging during COVID?
Not specifically during COVID. Internally, yes, absolutely. We put in place what you would expect us to put in place, what the government guidelines are in terms of PPE and washing hands and. So we haven't really had to change our behaviour. What I would say, though, is that we are a medicine supplier. We're a pharmaceutical company, and then secondly, a beauty company. We were founded as a pharmaceutical company, and in the UK particularly, obviously, we're licensed, or if you like, accredited by the MHRA, and therefore there is a huge amount of waste within health. And as we've been talking, I've been thinking, what the pandemic has given us is a throwaway society. You know, I see masks everywhere. I talked about plastic on the beach, I see masks. This whole thing about single use and the NHS and single use and use of plastics, it's not just about beauty, but all of that comes back to Joe's point, which is about how do we keep the product pristine? And that's the big question. And if we could tackle that, then it's not just the beauty industry that's going to win out, because it has so many things that could be applied into health. And then the final thing I would say on it is that we've just got to start applying lots of common sense. So, you know, we've already taken out, at Weleda, we've taken out the leaflets that used to explain a bit more about how to use products, because you don't need them. We've replaced them with QR codes. I'd like to see the meds industry start to do that with patient information sheets that are in every single. In fact, the information sheets that you get for medicines is usually bigger than the medicine itself. Can we all start applying some common sense and asking ourselves, is this really necessary, or is there a tech solution or just an elegant solution that would reduce this waste?
Yeah, it's a great point. We had a talk earlier today from George, who said about taking out that, you know, easily taking out those unnecessary packaging, you know, the leaflets. I know that some skincare brands have taken out the little applicators because they said, who really uses them? I think they'd done a survey and it had come through that very few are using it. So we need to got rid of that. But yeah, it's following on from Rodney. You know, it's about social change and everyone using their common sense. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I know it's for the greater good that we have to do all of these COVID tests, you know, but you do just think once you've done that and then you just throw it away again and you just think, oh gosh, you know, it's just, but I think that consumers are definitely changing those attitudes, and we'll see more of that, you know, to come.
I think that, sorry, Rodney, I was just going to say, you know, I certainly think that for all the bad that's come, obviously, with the pandemic, just that I feel like it has accelerated a kind of acceptance of the fact that we've got to change, and that and it's helped to sort of take a step back and reevaluate what's important to us and what's important to our lives and the world around us. And so I hope that whilst, you know, obviously, you know, it's been horrendous for so many people, and as you said, Jane, that, you know, the amount of waste that is now being generated for the greater good, you know, one hopes that people are kind of taking a step back and they are thinking about how they can change their ways and the types of, and the impact that they're having on the planet as well. And I really think that that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talking quickly about Jane's point on leaflets in medicines and so forth. I mean, yes, it is extremely irritating, but unfortunately, you know, the MHRA obviously insists that you have that information, and the younger generation would use QR codes, but sadly, it tends to be the older generation that need these medicines, and they probably have no idea, you know, how to use a QR code. Although there are some intelligent packaging systems where you can actually point your phone at it and it talks you through the instructions for the medicine, as opposed to you having to read it. So that for somebody older would be very handy, but of course that's quite an expensive addition to add. But that could be useful in medicines in the future.
That's a great point, Rodney. You know, we talk about being tech savvy and you know, but it's not necessarily all sort of older people that can necessarily use them in a way. But I would love to get also everybody's opinion, just to move away from the pandemic ever so slightly. There has been an infiltration of pouches. You know, L'Occitane have used them. There are a lot of other brands that are using these pouches. And I know that I've spoken to some people who are quite against these, as they don't believe that they can be recycled or there isn't the infrastructure to do so. And I would love to get everyone's sort of take on that. Are they a good way to do, a better way of doing things than always throwing out, but because they refill in a way, but it's just not using necessarily that right material? Maybe Jo, as the expert on refills, would like to weigh in there.
Great, thanks for that. So as I said previously on the presentation, we just shied away from pouches because we just thought if we are doing reusable and refillables and we're doing that to get rid of plastic packaging, it just seemed counterintuitive to even, you know, give it any sort of interest. However, when we did do our research report into all of the different materials that we could use for reusables, and that also included plastic, I might add, in terms of would they be suitable for cleaning protocols, pouches were actually a part of that data report. And unfortunately for pouches, they just didn't stand the test of time from a data perspective in terms of that reusability. So, you know, for me, if I was on the X Factor, I would be saying, to pouches, but that is a choice for, you know, other people to use. And again, me being Mrs. Positive, it's a nudge in another direction to see what works. So, you know, if somebody doesn't try it and learn from it, we don't learn from it either. So, you know, I don't really know if I've answered that. Help me out here, guys.
Yeah. I mean, just an indication. I'm not trying to justify pouches or otherwise, but certainly our members definitely have much more requirement for pouches these days. People are steering away from bottles, whether they be plastic bottles or glass or whatever, into pouches, because stand-up pouches have become an acceptable thing to purchase. I'm not talking about the environmental aspect for a minute, but people are used to sort of getting pouches, and rather than cardboard boxes, for example, as well. So yes, there is a big move towards pouches. Whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, I don't know. But yes, there is a definite trend towards it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Jane, is that something that maybe Weleda have you sort of thought about that, or maybe it would be something that you move into?
No, we're very old-fashioned. We quite like glass. Yeah, at the end of the day, my personal view is we have to move away from fossil fuels completely. If there's a halfway house, as I said, I think that we're into the next 5 years of, as you said, Joe, experimenting and trying these things out. I hope in 5 years' time that we're having very different levels of conversation and there have been some real technological breakthroughs. But, you know, if it was a plastic liner inside a cardboard pouch, I might be saying something slightly different, because it's about the weight of plastic that's used. But if you think about a pouch, it's actually quite heavy. It's got a heavy closed cap mechanism. I just think it's being used because it looks good on the shelf, and actually it's really cost efficient. And I think a lot of the big beauty brands will put cost over quality, because they're there to maximize profit. And so I'm not a fan at all.
I'd also say that if I took a very purist approach to the plastic problem, then, you know, this isn't about, the challenge isn't producing less plastic. It's about just stopping it altogether. And you know, producing pouches doesn't solve that problem. So that would be my, as I say, my purest perspective on it, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Well,
I'd just be interested, Ben. Obviously, we're talking about packaging, but you know, assuming you drive a car, I wonder how much plastic is in there, and how one could replace the plastic parts in your car, perhaps.
I do drive a car, but I couldn't answer that question, Rodney.
Well, I don't know the answer either, but it's just be interesting to find out, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
We've had actually another question come in. I don't think I read this one out actually. Just as we sort of come towards the end of the hour, which has gone incredibly fast. But I think this is from Rebecca, and I think mainly directed at you, Ben. How would you manage user experience while efficacy is important? Using a serum or cream as a solid bar isn't what a consumer is used to in regards to their experience.
So how would I manage it?
Yeah, how would you manage your user experience using a serum or cream as a solid bar isn't what the consumer is used to in regards to experience?
Yeah, so I think again, from my perspective, really, it's about exceeding expectations. I think there is, you know, my customers are often trying solid products for the first time when they buy my products. And so there is, we try to be as helpful as possible in teaching them how to use the products. There's how-to videos on the website explaining how to go about using them. So for me, though, it is something that people have to get the hang of. It's not, you know, it's not the same as using a serum or a cream. It is quite different. You know, you rub the bar between your hands and then you apply it to your face. So it is slightly different, but I think, you know, what we found, and in the reviews on our website, you know, people give it a few days, and then once they've got the hang of it, they absolutely love the results. So I think it's all about kind of educating people as to how to use the product to really make sure that they have that positive experience. And obviously the accessories that I mentioned earlier also help with that.
Yeah, we at Cosmetics Business did sort of a survey on looking at waterless products in particular and solids with those. And a lot of people were driven towards them because of the environmental aspects of it. But it was also when we asked about user experience, a lot was sort of a little bit skeptical. But I think, as you say, it's once you get the hang of it, I think it's just because we're all used to dipping our fingers in our creams and squeezing our shampoos out of our bottles. And it's just about adaptability, you know, but we are set in our ways as consumers in many ways. But I'd love to come, because we're sort of coming to the last 5 minutes. So I'd love to get everybody's kind of opinion really on what the way forward is in terms of packaging. I know we've touched on this briefly, but it would be great to get some roundups. And maybe starting with you, Jane.
Collaboration is the word that I would use. I would love to think that we as a beauty industry could work together. The British Beauty Council is setting up Sustainable Beauty Coalition, and we want everybody in the industry to work together. Maybe we could start aligning the plastics that we use so that we can start to put in good recycling solutions. That's just an interim, as a stepping stone. We absolutely need to be open sharing. We need to be talking about these kind of things so that we become part of the solution. The beauty industry becomes part of the solution and isn't seen as being part of the problem. So collaboration is the word I would put in the room.
And what about you, Jo?
So just, you know, to amplify what Jane has said, I think the working together in different industries, so taking collaboration even further than just the beauty industry. So we are part of FMCG, and a liquid product or a solid product, whether you eat it or put it on your skin, you know, from a packaging perspective, it's the same. And I think there's many things that we can learn from the food and drinks industry, because I feel that within packaging, potentially they're further ahead on the journey than we are in our industry. I'm not sure I can put a word to that, but I just want it to be wider than just collaborating within our own industry, although we need to start there because that's, you know, where we are. I think the other thing is, you know, and I'm a big believer in this, please can you share your mistakes? You know, if you know, for instance, that an aluminium bottle with a pump on it, you know, leaks because the pump was made for a plastic bottle, you know, let people know, because that then saves other, whether it's small brands or big brands. And that's what I'd really like to see, is that sharing, because we're not very good at sharing what we do wrong in the beauty industry. Everything's about what we do really well. And it's not that I don't love that, I do. But if we shared our mistakes, I think we'd maybe move further ahead quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, knowledge is power. Absolutely. If everybody sort of knew it, we'd be just on the absolute right tracks. And what about you, Rodney, just to sort of sum up, you know, from members that get in touch?
Well, collaboration, I would say, is government and local authorities have got to get their act together. I mean, we're not good at recycling our waste. And I think somebody mentioned that Wales is much better than the UK, but, you know, forget what the areas are. We're way below par, and we could do so much more with our materials if we got proper reprocessing plants, and that applies to plastics in particular. It's actually a very valuable resource, and we're just chucking it away. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see. Government can't sort of say we ought to be banning plastic and we ought to be doing this and we ought to be doing that. They are the ones that should be leading it and pumping the money into recycling centres up and down the land.
Yeah, there's a lot of onus on consumers to do their bit. So, but it's also about, you know, helping them to be able to do that. And finally, to you, Ben, I think we'd love to hear your sort of roundup on, should everybody toss out their packaging and reformulate to solids?
Obviously, I'd love that, but I think, you know, again, going back to the point at the very start, I appreciate that that's not necessarily a practical solution in the short term. I'd say that, you know, Jo's point about collaboration beyond the industry, I think is really key. So just 2 examples of that for me is my cartons are made of a board that comes from the catering industry, which is where I found it. And then the protective packaging that I use for my dishes actually comes from the wine and spirits industry. So none of them have come from the kind of key innovations, if you like, for want of a better word, have actually come from the beauty industry, if you like. But so, you know, collaboration is key. More and more of these discussions is really important, and understanding that, you know, just an open source approach to how we tackle this problem is exactly right. I don't think I can add any more than that, to be honest with you. Apart from, I think that brands should take more responsibility for what happens to their packaging after it leaves the warehouse or the retailers or whatever. And again, coming back to sort of both Joe and Jane's organisations and how they're leading that way in terms of, you know, really thinking about and trying to take all the friction away from the consumer and all the barriers, you know, knock all those barriers down so that they really can recycle their products effectively in the right way. And I think that is a really sensible and pragmatic approach to where we're at today.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, and nice to hear that you said we should do this again. I think we should all come back together another point, maybe in a year's time, and hash out what's new to the industry. But thank you all so much, Joe, Rodney, Jane, and Ben. It has been such a pleasure having you here to join us, and I'm sure the audience gained a lot of insights in the packaging world today. So, so thank you all very much.